I love to see the towns passing by and to ride these rails neath God's blue sky. Let me travel this land from the mountains to the sea, 'cause that's the life I believe He meant for me. And when I'm gone and at my grave you stand, say God called home your rambling man.
Welcome to Ramblin' Man Podcast, episode number 59. This one is with Mark Barnes, and we talk about therapy. It's a really good episode. Really appreciated Mark taking the time to sit down and talk to me about it and not charging me $400 an hour for it. Kidding. It's a great episode. He really kind of gets in depth and even talks about like how the insurance companies and stuff handle all that. It's a fascinating talk, and I really appreciate Mark for sitting down and talking. Sponsor of this episode is Feral Giant. Feral Giant is a graphic design, illustration, and social media company. They do work for businesses large and small, anything from album art to complete packaging overhaul for a major national company. If you'd like to learn more about Feral Giant, visit them online at feralgiant.com or follow along on any of the social media at Feral Giant. We appreciate them sponsoring this episode. Without much further ado, here's the episode. How long have you been a therapist?
Since the fall of 1992, I guess is when I entered private practice.
Okay. This may be, I don't know if this is a dumb question or not. Is it always private practice, or can you work, is there, I don't want to say corporations, but as a designer, it's like working on your own. Like, is it always kind of working on your own? Is therapy?
Well, no. I mean, people can work for agencies like a community mental health center or a hospital.
Okay.
Those jobs have really gone by the wayside over the last 20-some years as the healthcare landscape has changed dramatically. I mean, I never expected to be in full-time private practice. I thought I would do some teaching and work in a hospital and have private practice be maybe a third of my work life. But it has been my entire work life since pretty much the beginning.
And was it like, so you were young and you were doing private practice, were there some, I don't want to say bumps in the road, but like hurdles and stuff to get through of like getting used to, I don't know, think of like, it's all on me. Like I'm the one, I'm the point person.
Well, I mean, first of all, I should give you some more context.
Okay.
I mean, in the course of training, I had been seeing patients in therapy for years already. So was not, it was maybe not as an abrupt a baptism as you might imagine.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, of course. And whereas like in design, it's like after my degree, it's like, okay, go out into the world. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what is new about it is that up until that point, I had always had, some kind of supervision that was structured into my work.
Okay.
And following my entry into private practice, I had to secure that for myself, and so you don't have the same kind of structural backup that you do in training.
Do you have to kind of put on like a sales and marketing hat of like, or is a lot of it referrals when you first start out?
Well, it's almost entirely referrals.
Okay.
And I mean, I do have a web page that I get referrals from, but more often it's from colleagues who
Okay.
have, feel good about the work I do, and they send people my way.
Okay.
But I mean, in private practice, you're right to bring up the marketing issue because, I mean, I am an entrepreneur
Yeah.
in this business, and so I have to keep all my own books and do all my own marketing. It's not that has been a very extensive
Right.
endeavor, but you have to do all the things that anybody in business for themselves would have to do.
Yeah. And I can even imagine like the changing landscape of back then. It would be more, okay, I can't not put on the marketing hat. Like, it would be more like Yellow Pages would be good.
Right.
Maybe ad in the paper or something. Whereas now it's like, I was saying earlier, like SEO and digital and thinking about like, okay, this is how people are searching for this now.
Oh yeah, I got rid of my Yellow Page ad many, many years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know the last time I saw a Yellow Pages.
Mhm.
I mean, there was a while where they were just dropping off and they wouldn't even put them on my porch anymore. They would put them on the sidewalk, and it was usually right after all the leaves fell. So I would just not find it until I raked my leaves. I was like, oh, good Lord. Get that thing out of here.
Yeah.
So in starting out, is there, I know you go through and you get your degree and doctorate or master's or all of that. Do you kind of check in from time to time or look for new things in the field? Or is it kind of just you've learned all you need to know and you're just moving forward?
Well, it would be nice if you learned all you needed to know before you started, but I have to say that, and this is certainly not to imply that someone just starting out has no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
But what I knew when I left graduate school and entered private practice, I'd have to count as a small portion
Okay.
of what I actually utilize,
Right.
in practice today. And so it ought to be an ongoing career-long learning process. And whether that means a person sticks with some area of special interest that they started with, or whether that means that they actually add or change areas of interest, either way, it involves constant learning. And there's no way to do this work without learning just in the process of doing it. At least, I mean, I suppose somebody might be able to ignore all the incoming data, but I mean, I learn stuff every day, even now, and I'm not just counting, deliberate efforts
Right.
to learn through reading or going to conferences or talking to other experts or something.
And does some of that kind of come from your patients? Like, okay, I've worked with this person over the course of a few years, and I've really seen when I do this, there's improvement. When I do this, it doesn't go well. So then when you see somebody else, you can kind of figure out, it's like, oh, this is kind of like person D. And
Yeah, there is some of that. I mean, it's always a balance between any individual's unique qualities and
Right.
what's going to be helpful to them, and then also what you learn about categories of people and categories of problems and
Right.
all of that.
Okay. And I don't know if this is going into a realm you can't talk about, but because I keep hearing about brought up more and more like CTE and, CTE the head injuries from
Yeah,
football
right.
and UFC and all that. And I don't know if it's because I follow sports a lot, if it's like there was a thing today, because the Aaron Hernandez thing has popped up a lot, and they're like his brain was the brain of a 80-year-old, even though he was like 27. And it's just like that causing problems. I don't even know if there's a question there. That's just something that popped up that's kind of at the front of my brain right now of like,
Yeah.
okay, I played football and I boxed. How many times did I get hit?
Mhm.
Is that something I need to think about or get checked or something? And I'm not asking for a diagnosis. I'm just like, that's just something that I think like 30 years ago we didn't think about. And now it's kind of a little more prescient.
Well, certainly. And I would say that in psychology in general, in psychotherapy,
Yeah.
There's certainly much more awareness and emphasis regarding head injury and even just neurology,
Okay.
period, and the way in which the brain, as
Mhm.
opposed to the mind, although that's in many ways a false dichotomy, but
Yeah.
it seems like a necessary one for many discussions.
Yeah.
But I mean, the brain and brain science is, has exploded in the last several decades,
Yeah.
and it certainly is increasingly relevant in the minds of people doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
So, at least I would hope it is. It certainly has been in mine and in
Yeah.
others that I talk with.
And do you kind of see a trend of people taking it a little bit more serious? I don't want to say seriously, but seriously, or being more open to it now, like
Open to
going to therapy or like that now than like did it used to kind of be a little bit more? Want to keep this on the hush hush, kind of keep this on the down low. Now it's like, no, I do this, and it's really helped. Like,
I think there's certainly been some destigmatization
yeah,
of mental health. I don't know how to gauge that to
Okay.
say to what degree is it
Right.
really less of a stigma. I certainly know plenty of people who don't want it known that
Yeah.
they do this,
yeah,
but I also know plenty of people who wouldn't think twice about
yeah,
speaking of it, and I don't know what the proportions are in the population at large who, and I think it's also one thing to profess a position about mental health, and
Right.
then it's a different thing to reveal something about your own
right,
personal experience. And there are
Right.
plenty of people who might take a sort of politically correct stance on it, but then really would not want anyone
Yes.
to know about their own individual activities.
the public versus the private.
Yeah.
This
yeah.
is how I feel about this out here, but inside I'm not going to say. I'm just, and you saying that made me think I have overshared way too much with some of my friends. There's actually a group of two other guys where it's like, it's almost like we're trying to one up one another just to make the other one uncomfortable. It's like, that's just,
Yeah.
boys will be, I don't want to say boys will be boys, but idiots will be idiots, I think is what.
Well, I was going to say that, it someone might assume that my preference would be for, some sort of total openness about all this.
Right.
But, I don't really think I subscribe to that extreme a position. I think
Yeah.
that this is really quite a private endeavor. And
Yeah.
if it's going to be effective for most people, privacy is of the utmost importance.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I'm not in favor of everybody running around shouting from the rooftops about their experiences in therapy.
Yeah, because some of it's, I think from a sports idea is like, I really need to work on this, but I can't work on this in public. I have to work on this kind of on the inside and not let anybody else see this or whatever, whatever that this is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's very often the case that I don't find out why people have come to see me until months or even sometimes years after they started coming in.
Right.
People, even in the privacy of this setting, people can be extremely hesitant to articulate kind of the real stuff. And,
right.
Whether that's just to me or even to themselves,
right.
A big part of what happens in therapy, ideally, I think, is that people become able to get some things into words for themselves, develop some kind of tolerance and acceptance of uncomfortable realities, and be able to share that with another human being who can pay attention without having to impose some agenda on it or judgment or avert their gaze because it's too awful to bear witness to. Anyway, it's just expanding on your point.
Because a lot of them are probably walking around with their guard up all the time. Like, people can't know this about me.
Absolutely.
To where getting to a place where you can actually, because you're so built up with that guard up, to actually let it down is hard. To say the least.
And probably never complete.
Yeah.
That even people who have been in therapy for many years still maintain some private sphere.
Yeah.
And still maintain some sphere that they're unaware of.
Yeah.
It's always a matter of just trying to stay at the edge of the frontier, but you never cover the entire landscape.
Okay. And say someone new comes to you and says, I want to do this. Do you kind of pre-interview them before you allow them to come into therapy, or is it kind of just you come and you sit down with them and you figure out if it's a good fit? Because is there such a thing of like a good fit between a therapist and
Absolutely. I would say that's probably the most important variable in whether or not anything good comes of it.
Okay.
People can have a wide range of theoretical orientations or practice styles, and even with great expertise and perfectly good intentions and integrity, if two people don't click,
right,
it's just not gonna go very far. So I wouldn't say that I sort of pre-screen people as to whether or not they would be a good candidate for therapy. Let me backtrack. Once in a while, somebody will come in and they'll be unsure whether what they're dealing with actually warrants professional help.
Yeah.
I've never met anybody who was worried enough about it that they came in to ask that question where the answer was not yes. But that's not just because I want paying customers. I mean, I might say yes, but think somebody else would be a better fit for them. But it is very much about fit. And when I'm talking to people initially, I'm certainly trying to figure out, is this somebody who I think will work well with me and that I can work well with? And, I invite them to, consider those same factors. And some people come in absolutely clear and aware of that as a major consideration. Other people come in and they really, haven't even given that any thought. They just sort of assume, well, if you have a problem, you go to this kind of a person and it gets fixed. And it's not that straightforward and clear cut.
Okay. It's not like plumbing where it's
no.
Everyone knows where the pipes go.
Right.
And you can kind of figure it out.
Yeah, you can not like your plumber's personality
Yeah.
or their interactional style,
Yeah.
but still feel like it was okay to pay
Yeah.
them to fix your leaky pipe. But in here, that is not the case.
Yeah. Again, this may be some. I'm curious. Is it common is it common to get, like, let's say a year in and then be like, you know what, this isn't a good fit, I'm going to recommend you to somebody else? Is that like a common thing or?
No.
Okay.
Definitely not. Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that sometimes
Right.
two people working together get to some impasse.
Right.
And it may be that somebody else would be better suited to take the work from there.
Okay.
But no, it's not like people would be working together for a year and then discover that they weren't a good fit. I don't
Yeah.
think. I mean, I haven't
Okay.
encountered that. It's hard for
Okay.
me to imagine that happening.
If it's not a good fit, you figure it out pretty early on.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would say so.
Okay. This is an odd question, but is it bad? And I may not frame this question completely correctly, but is it bad to use the word crazy? You know what I mean? Like, in the world now, I've heard people like fuss at people for, they're like, don't say that, because there are people that I was like, okay, that's another one that I got to strike from.
You mean like it has come to have the same, I don't know, the same problem with usage as, I don't know, using the word retard for somebody
Yes.
who's intellectually
mentally challenged
Yeah.
or whatever you call it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I certainly use the word crazy, and people in my office use it on a regular basis. If you're using it, as a derogatory term
Right.
For somebody who's psychotic, then I can appreciate how that would be problematic. But in common parlance, it is a useful
Yeah.
term.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things that just don't make any sense, and calling them crazy it just seems like it's an efficient
Yeah.
way of communicating. And whether we're talking about a situation that's crazy or a thought that's crazy, or even considering somebody else crazy because they're not, you can't fathom why they're doing what they're doing. That's just how people talk. I don't have any big problem with that.
Traffic was crazy.
Yeah.
I will try to ease up on calling ex-girlfriends crazy, but it's right there in the title of a TV show, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Well, and I mean, even if you're going to use crazy as to mean somebody who is deranged, well, there certainly are deranged people.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I think it would really bog down the communication if I force people to backtrack and use a different word when we both know what they mean.
I think I end up using illogical a lot of times when it comes to ex-girlfriend. So it's like, I just don't understand. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. It's like, that's a fancy way of saying, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I would pair that with, I want to say that, I have a conviction that things actually do make sense.
Right.
They may make sense for reasons that I don't have access to, but I don't believe in a random universe. I mean, things are caused by things.
Right.
As horrible as a serial killer's behavior is, and I'm certainly not trying to say anything to imply that it can be excused,
Right.
but it can be understood if you look deeply enough into this person's history and in their constitutional makeup. I mean,
Yeah.
these are not, in some ways, they're not illogical. And
Right.
even when people talk about they have some thought or some feeling and they consider it crazy, it seems to me like the task of our work is to begin with the presumption it's actually not crazy.
Yeah.
Now, you may not understand where it comes from yet, but if we look at it closely enough, it will make sense. You may end up wishing it were different,
Right.
or you disagree with something, but it didn't just come out of nowhere.
Right. I think in that vein, I've heard a lot of comedians talk about, like, I'm trying to think of somewhere to be a good example. Standing, like going for a hike and standing a little too close to the edge and hearing a little voice in the back of their head saying, jump, like that. Kind of as a joke, but a lot of them I was like, no, I've had that thought, but it's more of like, I think it's almost more, this may sound out of left field, but it almost is more like an adventure thing of like, I can pre-imagine what that would be like. Would it be like that? Does that make sense?
Sure.
So they always say, well, that means I'm suicidal or something. I was like, I don't know just in a general swath. I was like, I don't know that I can say that. It's almost like you're pre-imagining what that would be like. And I think there's a lot of people, like comedians, who have a very active imagination. Of course, that's what you're going to think of in that moment.
Well, I certainly think that's a plausible explanation and applies to some people. I think there are also people who actually,
Oh, yeah.
that really could be some element within them.
Yeah.
That is self-destructive. And so I just think there are a lot of different possibilities.
A lot of variables.
Yeah.
But I think about that. I was like, I'm not that way. I'm just thinking, it's like,
Right.
man, okay, from up, because of course I'm a stupid guy. I'm like, okay, from up here I would actually die. It wouldn't break any bones. I wouldn't have to be on crutches. And I know it's a very dark thought, but it's like, no, that's probably better. I don't want to be, have a back injury and have to have somebody care for me. I'm a caring individual. I'm just kidding. But I think about that, like I think it's because I experienced that and I never thought about it until now. We live in a world with like comedy specials, podcasts, all this stuff to where I think you hear a lot more information. So when you hear I think there's some things I hear, I was like, oh, okay, it's not just me. It's not just.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is another important thing that happens in psychotherapy is that people come in often with the erroneous notion that they're the only ones who have a certain feeling or reaction or set of thoughts, and it's tremendously relieving to find out that no, lots of other people have those same thoughts or feelings. They're not broadcasting them just like you're not broadcasting them. So, nobody realizes that this is pretty ubiquitous. I think that's what makes a lot of comedy work, since you're talking about comedians. I mean, lots of humor is really based on saying something that everybody already thought or felt, but nobody was willing to say. And then there's a lot of relief when it is said, and that provokes laughter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's interesting. There's been a couple documentaries on, do you have to be messed up to get into comedy? Mm-hmm. And there's some people that kind of push that. And then somebody recently came out with one that's like, no, you can have a happy childhood, and just, that's where the creative part of your brain is in comedy for whatever reason. You don't have to have a dark childhood or whatever to go into that field, where that's always been kind of a myth in the background for a long time.
Yeah, and the same thing applies to all sorts of creatives. Right. So, do you have to be a tortured, starving artist in order to do good work, or a musician or a performing artist or whatever? And I think where that comes from, this how that gets conflated, is creatives tend to be very sensitive people.
Right.
And so they are taking in a lot more than the average person. They're processing it in different ways, at deeper levels, more elaborately. They're more responsive emotionally in general. And so if you take such a person and you subject them to even just the average amount of stress, well, they are likely to take more damage because they are, everything is amplified in their experience.
Right.
And so it's true that many creatives end up really carrying around trauma from the past, or, they may be more anxious or depressed, but it's not because they're creative.
Right.
It's indirectly related to that. But if you have a creative person who is very sensitive, and they come from a home where that was both valued and they were taught how to take care of themselves as a sensitive person, and how to navigate life with this constitution, then these can be some of the most healthy people in the population.
Right.
And they are aware of all sorts of things other people are oblivious to, and they can use that to great advantage.
When I think about it, there's so many factors too of like, I hate to keep bringing, it is my podcast, but but it's like, I'm a big giant dude who played sports, and the only artist in my family. And I've heard that story from other like football players or boxers or basketball players, something like, no, I really want to do art. It's just I was put in this body, and this is where I was. You talked about like if you had somebody that was predisposed to being more sensitive and being an artist, and that being kind of shepherded. Well, but then if you're a big dude and you're just shepherded into basketball or football or whatever, and it's like you kind of push down I can't say I'm into art because that's not cool. Around this group, but
well, even to take that further, I mean, it seems like this sensitive constitution, and actually there's a whole research literature on this. I wish it had a fancier title, but the category is just called highly sensitive person. One of the few times that psychology resisted the temptation to come up with some weird jargon.
Right.
But anyway, it's about, 15 to 20% of the population has a markedly different central nervous system.
Wow.
And this is not made up. It's not synonymous with introversion, although you can imagine why highly sensitive people might be introverted, because they need to limit the level of stimulation that they're exposed to. It's not synonymous with being anxious or depressed or neurotic or having a sensory integration disorder or all these things. But you can imagine easily how, there would be overlap, but it's not the same thing. And yet, these people exist as a pretty small minority in the general population, and they get the message unless they do have very attentive parenting that, as you said, shepherds them through this process. They get the message from day one that, why are you making such a big deal out of everything? Or, their efforts to take care of themselves are viewed as self-indulgent or a sign of weakness, or all sorts of negative spin on this. And people can end up feeling quite horrible about themselves when this is by no means something pathological about them. It can actually be a tremendous strength, but it has to be understood and appreciated as such, rather than just seen as something that makes them weird or unlike other people. And
and it could be a thing of like confidence. Like if you're already sensitive and you're already I don't want to say have a hang up about that or something, then it erodes at your confidence to be like, I just need you to stop for a second because this is my problem. And you just kind of got to calm down for a minute, like telling people that. But if you're already sensitive or already concerned about it, you may lack that confidence to actually stand up for yourself, I guess is a better way
absolutely.
to put it.
If the message you've gotten all along is that this is something that you should be ashamed of and you shouldn't be this way, and you set about trying to pretend you're not, it snowballs into a lot of problems.
Yeah, how I've had this conversation way too many times of growing up playing sports, how some of the ways the coaches treated us would get them put in jail now. Mm-hmm. Whereas back then I feel it was a little bit more like, just get over it. Just, or I think about like the difference in like World War II veterans and Vietnam veterans. World War II, they were like, no, we just don't talk about that. We don't deal with that or anything. Whereas a lot of the Vietnam vets were a little bit more open, being like, this was messed up. Like, I got to talk about this.
Yeah. And I think that that's even more true with more recent combat veterans.
Yeah.
The PTSD is now, not that everybody really understands what they're talking about when they use that term, but at least people have some awareness of it as a real thing. Yeah.
Well, there's a guy, I hate to keep bringing up comedy, but I listen to like 90% comedy podcasts. So that's always at the forefront. There's a guy, Bert Kreischer, who had a show called Bert the Conqueror and Trip Flip and Hurt Bert. And he was talking to a veteran, because he has anxiety and all this stuff. And the guy was like, you have PTSD. He's like, difference is your PTSD is from riding roller coasters, and that's okay. And he was like, oh, okay. He was like, well, I can't have PTSD because I never served. And he was like, no, it's literally in the name. Like it has nothing to do with getting shot at. It's all about, did you had traumatic?
Basically, it really boils down to whether a person's alarm system, was activated to a degree that really like exceeded their capacity to they become overwhelmed, and that this is something that they had no control over, and they perhaps had to endure repeatedly or continuously. And what happens is the alarm system in the brain, if you overload it enough, just stops resetting. So it just stays on all the time, or is easily triggered to come back on, even though current circumstances don't warrant that level of alarm. This is a neurological phenomenon that people don't have any control over.
Right.
And obviously it varies in severity, but people can have trauma from and any number of events. The nature of the event is less important than the fact that their circuitry was overloaded.
Right. Yeah. And I think it was so affiliated with soldiers for so long that now that's kind of, I see it more in like regular people of like, no, I had this happen and that's what this is. But because I think a lot of people, I wanted to say normal people, I want to say regular people, and then I almost landed on people in the wild. But I'm going to go with the general public now, because their first time hearing that more was related to soldiers, and I think now it's more.
Well, that is where the idea originated.
Oh, is it really? Okay.
Yeah. It was, it started out with talking about shell shock. Yeah. Which is the pre-PTSD term for it. But the vast majority of the people that I see are successful, high functioning, middle-aged professionals. These are not people that you'd think of as psychiatric casualties. but they are. It is just. Well, I guess I can't say that I'm amazed anymore, but
Yeah.
It is impressive how much their histories are riddled with all kinds of emotional violence,
Okay.
and in many cases physical violence.
Yeah.
That you would never associate it
Yeah.
with these people who are indeed quite average. But the statistics on how many people have been exposed to, horrific trauma
Yeah.
are they're shocking. And there are all sorts of different ways to measure that. And so, I'm not going to ramble off numbers because it would be misleading. But the fact of the matter is, huge swaths of the population are walking around traumatized. It is epidemic.
Yeah.
And people typically don't even recognize the degree to which they've been impacted by it. They may know nothing else, so they don't have a reference point for comparison. They have adapted to it in some way, often at great cost, which, that gets sorted out in the process of therapy. But it is really not an extraordinary thing at all.
And so I feel like some of them, it's if they grew up in it, they were just so used to it, they just thought that's what life was. Like, if you grow up in extreme poverty and, people are doing drugs or dealing drugs or have guns and stuff, and it's it's an everyday thing. It's just, it's their normal. It's their normal.
A fish doesn't know it's in water.
That's good. Okay. Do you ever give anybody, I hate to use the term homework. I was trying to figure out how to write it down so I could remember what it was. But like things to do, if you have somebody that doesn't do great in public or something, do you kind of say, okay, in this week, I would love for you to go and just walk up and down Market Square just to push boundaries or help in the process of being better with what's wrong?
That is certainly a component of some forms of therapy.
Yeah.
It happens not to be the kind that I typically
Okay.
do. It's not that I've never talked with somebody about how they might, expose themselves to things that they're afraid of or, they're having trouble with. But it just wouldn't come out of, it wouldn't take that form where I'm giving somebody an assignment. There are certainly kinds of therapy that utilize homework assignments of all sorts quite extensively, but it's not the kind I do.
Okay. And I thought, and I don't know if this is a good question or not, but we'll see. Can everything be linked back to something? Like I have like a minor form of claustrophobia. Does that mean that there's something way back in the back to where that's why I have that, or could it just be something firing different in my brain?
Well, it could be either or both, but in either case, it has a cause.
Okay.
There is a great deal of influence exerted by our past.
Yeah.
Much of it from the shadows, where we can't really see it very clearly, or maybe not at all.
Yeah.
Again, that is something that happens in psychotherapy, the kind that I do, which is really trying to get a depth understanding of what a person has experienced and how it's influencing them, and help them to sort out what they want to do. Which, as an aside real fast, that's why I don't give assignments. That's why I'm not very directive, because I think that in order for us to be able to do that kind of exploration and for people to come up with their own insight and understanding, I have to really get out of the way. I'm a midwife for the emergence of those insights, but I don't feed them to people, and I don't direct them in what they should do.
Right. You're not a funnel.
No, I'm not a. I mean, it's not that. No,
it's okay.
It's hard to make any statements that are
right.
purely and always the case, right. But sometimes I do nudge people, or I do certainly point to things that I want them to consider, and I may challenge things that I think they're where they're kidding themselves about something.
Right.
But much more often, I'm just interested in why things are the way they are, and once that is laid bare, people make their own decisions. But now it's an informed choice, whereas before they were operating, at least to some degree, in the dark, and maybe they were wrestling with some parts of themselves that they didn't even realize were themselves. They may have construed it as something outside them, but it turns out, no, whatever they thought was the source outside them was really just a proxy for something that's inside them. And until they can come to grips with that, they really can't get very far.
So there's times where, and I'm going to do a very truncated timeline, but let's say you meet somebody, you talk to them, and within the first 3 meetings, you're like, I think I know what the problem is. Now I have to figure out how to get them to where they recognize that. And to where it's almost like 6 months down the line, they finally get there, and you almost do a little like fist pump, and you're like, got him there.
Well,
sometimes I know it's too broad or general, but
there's something to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes. I guess I would just want to balance that out by saying that when people are unaware of something, they're unaware of it for good reason.
Okay.
So if you came to me and several sessions in, I had some pretty clear idea about something that was in the shadows that was, contributing to your problem.
Right.
It's not like it would be helpful for me to just kind of lay that out to you.
Right.
In all likelihood, you would just find it objectionable and disturbing, and that'd be the end of it. You'd stop coming to see me, or you would just reject that theory out of hand and feel misunderstood, or it would not go well. So it's not really just a matter of me having some special knowledge that I then hand to the other person. It's got to be digestible.
Okay.
And that means it has to come at the right time. It has to come in bite-sized pieces so they don't choke on it. In many regards, it has to come from their own emerging awareness rather than somebody else making a pronouncement.
Okay.
So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
I think, yeah, that makes sense. Do you have like winning moments of just like, okay, I got him there, to where I don't want to say do a dance of joy, but I mean, it's just, that's got to feel good sometimes if you get somewhere.
I am pleased when people are operating with a clearer perspective than when they were before. Yeah.
Do you have to kind of be a little bit of, I don't want to say a blank slate, but not show too much emotion or anything when they're saying things so they don't feel judged or in any way, shape, or form?
Well, yes. However,
okay.
When I talk about that my job is to understand the other person, and to be able to empathize with what's going on with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's not like how to put it. That's not just aspirational or some kind of marketing shtick.
Right.
It is like that is really my stance. So I don't have to work very hard to seem like I'm not judging, because I'm really and truly not judging.
Okay.
It's not that I, would sit over here and approve of everything that somebody's doing, but it's just like that is just kind of not in the mix very much, or even at all. And in fact, plenty of people assume that I am judging, regardless of whether or not I am holding a poker face or. And so we talk about that. Maybe I make it clear that I didn't have the judging response that they imagined, but maybe it's more useful in some cases for them to sort of take that and run with it, and we explore it further without me correcting them. But I really do try to understand things in their world from the inside out, and it just makes the issue of having some big emotional reaction or some kind of judging response. It just kind of makes it moot.
Okay.
And now it's not to say I don't have emotional reactions to people. I can have very, very strong emotional reactions in terms of, somebody tells me about something that was clearly horrific and painful.
Right.
I'm certainly moved by that, and I can be, I can be angered, and I can be annoyed, and I can be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
But that really is largely kind of over to one side, and I'm able to maintain a focus on trying to understand the other person.
Okay. When you had mentioned serial killers earlier, have you ever worked with law enforcement on anything? Not in like pay, but like, I think we see that so much in like film and TV. That's another question I wrote down here on how therapy is portrayed in film and TV. But
oh yeah, it's almost always.
Yeah, but for
absurd.
The law enforcement, is it? Because I know the city actually has a place in one of the buildings not far from here, over on Middlebrook, where they have I don't know if it's a therapy department or what, a mental health facility, whatever, to where firefighters and police officers go over there and have a place to talk where it's private and it's.
Well, that sounds quite enlightened to me, but I'm not aware of that.
Yeah. I hope I got that right, because I swear on one side it was actual medical, like if you had problems or something, to where like I saw somebody had brought their kid in there for having like the flu or something. And then on the other side, that's how it was explained to me. Maybe I shouldn't be blowing up their spot. But it's I feel like firefighting law or firefighting, police officers, military, I don't want to say there's a toughness or a ruggedness there. Have you seen, and I'm talking more the industry in general, more of a willingness to take on therapy as a thing than maybe before? Because you always think of the stereotypical New York cop of like, I don't need that, or whatever.
I wish I had some basis for an opinion. I just don't know anything about what's happening in that way.
Okay. Because I always think about that, like guys being guys and guys being, not saying all police officers, all fire, but I think you know what I mean. Like fire, there's an inherent
toughness or machismo that guys have to portray. And I feel like that's shifting a little bit more, like in the last 10 to 15 years, to where that's not.
Well, I know people give lip service to that.
Yeah.
I really just don't know how much that
Yeah.
is
How
an
much weight
accurate
is there?
reflection
Yeah.
of what's happening.
Okay.
I would hope that it is more than lip service. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
dismiss it as only lip service. I just
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah. Okay. Film and TV. So how it's portrayed. So it's like Fraser Crane, right? Just sitting in the bar afterwards.
Yeah.
I was going to say there's any level of good and bad portrayed in film and TV.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that psychotherapy is often the butt of jokes and caricatured.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't find that stuff funny too. I don't feel great about the possibility that some people imagine that's what it really is, or base their opinion about how helpful it might be to someone on those kinds of representations. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, we're not the only butt.
Oh,
We're not the only butt of jokes, but we certainly are that.
the amount of crap that graphic designers get is way too high. It's kind of wild how big that swath is of like what it looks like, to the point to where there's a guy I know, I'm like, it looks like you Googled graphic designer and that's how you bought your clothes and your glasses and cut your hair.
Right,
Brother.
right.
Like, it's
Well,
so wild.
nobody can see what I look like right now, but for the record, I'm not wearing a turtleneck. I don't have suede patches on the elbows of my jacket.
You're not sipping sherry. I'm trying to think of like in film and TV. Let's see, Sopranos and Analyze This are two pretty similar ones. I always think of Frasier as being one. That may just be because I'm in the middle of rewatching Cheers, though. Yeah, it's wild how it's. I don't know. It seems like it's portrayed a lot more than maybe a lot of, other than like Cops or something. It seems like it's portrayed a lot. There's a lot in that in film and TV.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some exceptions, and I wish I could remember them more clearly. It's been so long since I saw these things that I hesitate to mention them. But I do think that Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting was probably a little more on the mark.
Yeah.
Was it Judd Hirsch in Ordinary People?
Oh yeah.
I'm blocking on the actor's name right now, but there was I think it was an HBO series. It didn't last very long, but it was called In Treatment.
Oh yeah. I remember that.
There were things about that I thought were there were some details that were way off, but I thought in general actually it certainly rang more true than most.
I forgot about Robin Williams. Oh yeah, that was a big one because they ran through all the stereotypes to get to him to be the tough love kind of the put him into a wall kind of guy.
Yeah, and I don't mean that everybody operates that way. I mean, I should say that I should make this disclaimer. That I certainly can by no means speak for all psychotherapists.
Oh, no.
There are as many different versions of psychotherapy as there are practitioners, I'm sure. And even within one theoretical framework, clinicians have their own interpretations, and they bring their own personality and their own idiosyncratic experiences to the work. So it's not like anybody really stands for any
one thing.
A large group of us.
I think I may know the answer to this, but I'm curious. Do you think it's better for people to start younger, or do you think they have to come to it when they're ready to come to it, or a little bit of both, maybe?
Well, I guess people can come to it when they're ready to come to it, regardless of their age.
Right.
I mean, young people can feel the need to enter into this kind of work. I think that people are able to do some parts of the work at one point in their development, and maybe that's all they can do at that point. And then when they reach another phase of their life, they're able to do some other
Right.
portion of what's needed. Someone who has their first child is going to be faced with a whole set of experiences and the feelings that are dredged up by those experiences, that they wouldn't have had
Right.
otherwise. I guess
I think I mean more seeking therapy. Like if you're a young kid who grew up in a very adverse environment, is it
possible to start therapy too early? Is that what you mean?
yeah, or is it you almost, I don't want to say wait until you're ready to be open to it. Does that make more sense? Like, is it better to attack it early, or is it you have to be ready, willing, and able to?
Well, the joke is, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the light bulb really has to want to change.
Oh my God. Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, you're not going to get anywhere with somebody who is dead set against the process.
Right.
Although I can tell you that I've had plenty of adolescents enter my office kicking and screaming because their parents dragged them in. But I would say in the vast majority of cases, they change their tune pretty fast when they come to realize that I actually am invested in helping them, that I'm not just an extension of their parents, that they have an ally. It doesn't mean that I fight for every indulgence they want from their parents. I didn't mean it like that, but that we can talk about what's really going on, which very often adolescents feel like, nobody's interested in talking about the real stuff.
Right.
And it makes a huge difference when they come to the realization that that is actually what I'm all about.
Right.
And then we have an alliance.
Is
So they weren't ready at the outset, but they become ready.
Right. I don't want to say it has to dawn on them that they were ready, but it has to dawn on them or they have to realize, that you're not standing there wagging a finger at them or anything.
Yeah.
Is there opportunity within the field for mentorship for younger therapists?
Yes. Unfortunately, that is something that has waned, I think. This goes to the changing environment of healthcare. But when I was in school, and for the first, couple years out of school, it was unthinkable that anybody would do psychotherapy without having been in psychotherapy themselves. And maybe even maintain their own psychotherapy alongside their work as a psychotherapist. And that they would be getting regular consultation from senior clinicians who, had lots more experience under their belt and could provide wisdom and guidance and perspective and so forth. But with the advent of managed care and the pressures on people throughout the healthcare field to do greater and greater volume, make less and less money, the idea that you had the quote-unquote luxury, I certainly don't consider it a luxury, but the luxury, to spend time getting consultation and spending your money on consultation that would, provide the kind of mentorship I think you're asking about. That has just become much more the exception than the rule. as far as I can tell. Now, it's not like I have any hard data to back that up, but I know that it used to be just taken for granted, and it's certainly become a rarity in terms of what I hear from my colleagues.
Okay. Is the field becoming, with how broad things are now, is the field becoming more specialized? Or do you think that there was a period where it became super specialized and then it's kind of, because of the state of the healthcare industry, it's kind of tapered off a little bit?
Yeah,
or has
know.
it always kind of been?
I guess I don't really know. I think that perhaps there was a time when people had I don't think this is truly a luxury, but it may seem like one in retrospect, people had the luxury of kind of working with the kind of people that they wanted to work with, because those were the people they were interested in,
okay,
or the kinds of issues they were interested in. And as the industrialization of healthcare increased, people ended up feeling like they have to take all the business that comes in their door, because they just can't afford to turn anybody away.
right.
At the same time, there are ways that therapy has just become more and more, I think, in a somewhat silly way, more and more sort of niche, oriented, where, and this reveals my own bias, but I see anything that's going on with a person as really being integral to the whole person.
Okay.
But there is this idea that, you should be able to do these things a la carte in some piecemeal fashion, and somebody comes in with, problem X, and so you treat them with therapy Y, because therapy Y addresses problem X, and it's very formulaic, mechanistic. I don't subscribe to that model of therapy or understanding of human beings, but I suppose that might be pointed to as a way in which this work has become more specialized. I would not call it specialized. I would call it fragmented.
Okay. Is teaching on your radar at all? To maybe hit a point where it's like you would like to teach?
Well, I had originally thought that I would do teaching. When I was in graduate school, the faculty was comprised largely of adjuncts who were clinicians in town. They were not full-time faculty. Full-time faculty was actually a very small core group, but then there was a very diverse set of adjuncts, and they provided a tremendous breadth to the program. And, they each were there to teach about the things that they were particularly interested in. I expected I would do something along those lines, and I really like the idea of that. I'm not a particularly academic-minded person, so the idea of being, a regular faculty person doesn't hold any appeal to me. But anyway, by the time I had gotten in the field, that same faculty was changing dramatically, and the adjuncts were largely done away with in favor of a much more homogeneous core faculty. And so the opportunity that I had expected to have to teach just, it just didn't even exist anymore.
Right.
The same was true as far as hospital work. I had done a lot of hospital work and really, really loved the kind of intensity that had been a part of hospital work. But that's not what hospital work involves anymore. People are, we would have people in the hospital for long periods of time, weeks or months, where
Right.
you really could accomplish something, and
Right.
it was very gratifying. But now people enter a psych unit, they're lucky to stay for 2 or 3 days, and obviously nothing
Right.
of any real value occurs there. That's typically the only thing that can come of it is somebody's prevented from committing suicide, or maybe they're there long enough to get some kind of medication issue sorted, but real psychological treatment no longer occurs in that setting.
Wow.
And it's really tragic because there are a lot of things that can't be done any other way. It's not really true that you can just accomplish the same thing on an outpatient basis. So anyway,
Yeah.
I jumped on board with every insurance network I could get on at the outset, because that was just there was no reason not to, and it
Right.
was just how things worked. But after only a couple years, as managed care encroached more and more and more on patient privacy and on the autonomy of the patient therapist dyad to determine what was best for the patient, and things were being dictated more and more on the basis of insurance company profits, and being I could not stomach being told by a clerk somewhere about what sort of treatment I was allowed to render.
Right.
I got out of all insurance networks, and I've never looked back. I mean, it does mean that some people that would otherwise be able to see me can't, because they have to pay my full fee instead of
Right.
an insurance copayment. But I decided I'd much rather have the drawbacks of working outside of the healthcare industry as it's come to be
Right.
set up than the problems of working within it. I found it was just soul crushing. It destroyed the work as I understood how it should be done, and so anyway, I know that wandered far from where we started off.
Yeah, that's okay.
And I could get on a soapbox about healthcare that would last for many hours. I don't want to do that.
If you're outside of the insurance networks, does that mean HIPAA is HIPAA still applicable to you?
Well, HIPAA has become so elaborate and convoluted that I've even had healthcare attorneys give me differing opinions
Okay.
about various things related to that. It's ironic that actually part of why I wanted out of the insurance setup was to guard patient privacy.
Right.
And HIPAA is supposedly all about patient privacy within the insurance
Right.
system. But it actually does change things. If somebody is, okay, if you go into your physician and you've
Right.
got a broken arm, it's really not that big a deal
Right.
to think that your physician is going to share the details of your broken arm with an insurance reviewer
Right.
who's going to determine whether or not you needed a cast or whatever other intervention. It is a completely different matter if you are coming in telling me about your childhood sexual abuse, or you're
Yeah.
coming in telling me about any number of
Right.
highly personal issues, and these things are going to some reviewer you've never met, who you have no choice about, or who has no personal investment in you
Yeah.
or your issues, and they are going to be scrutinizing our discussions with an eye to figuring out how to not pay a claim, by deeming it somehow, not necessary.
Right.
It is just a completely different matter, and to whatever degree people were aware about this sort of invisible third party in the room, it interfered with their freedom to talk. And if they're not free to talk, well, this project is hamstrung from the outset. Yeah. And people often actually are just not very aware of how much information is forwarded along. When you buy your insurance policy, you waive all sorts of rights that you don't even know you're waiving. And I felt it incumbent I did not want to be relaying information about people that they didn't even understand I was going to be relaying. So, once I sort of laid it all out and so that they could actually make an informed consent, people were often aghast about that. It really put a damper on what we could do, and I eventually decided it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
And so, people can still get reimbursed in part for what they spend on me as an out-of-network provider.
Right. Oh, yeah.
But anyway, I just found, this is before we even get to the issue of, and most people, I think, imagine that clinicians object to insurance on the grounds of what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
Which is, you also take a huge pay cut. Pay cut. A huge pay cut.
Okay.
As much as 50% off what the going rate would be. And on top of that, you now have just signed on for mountains of extra paperwork that you don't get paid for. And so just from the standpoint of the business operation, it's horrible. Right. But that's not why I didn't stick around in insurance. It was because it really compromised what I felt like the work should be. And I had one of my mentors at one point said, "Well, would you rather work half time for full pay or full time for half pay?" It's like not a hard decision to make. Yeah. But again, that's secondary.
Yeah. It's wild because when I worked up at the paper, one of the HR people had walked out on the floor and was talking to somebody, and I made a comment. One of our employees was sick. It was in the hospital for something. And I was just like, and I just turned to the other person that was talking about it. I was like, "Oh, are they okay? Like, what's going on?" And the HR person walked up and said, "You all can't talk about that." And I said, "Why can't?" And she's like, "Because of HIPAA. You can't talk about that." And I went, "I need you to walk away because that person's been my friend for like 12 years." Yeah. And I think I may have said some F words at that person. I've been like, not this F word, different F word. I said, "They're my friend." I don't, co-worker isn't even on, it's number 37 on the list. It's like, this is so dumb. And I pointed at him and said, "You can walk away now." Mm-hmm. Like, I was like, this is dumb. This is so stupid. Because it was something simple, like she had, not saying like the flu or something but it was something like that. I was like, I can literally text her and say, "What's up with you? Right. Are you going to tell her she can't?" Yeah. It's the middle, I hate to say the whole middle management of it all. It's kind of wild. Yeah. It's like, it's weird. There's my little rambling man tangent. Yep. And going back to the teaching.
Yeah.
Here's maybe another dumb question. Are there actual grades, or is it more like on a pass-fail? Because does that make sense? Like, it's
in
not
graduate school?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like it's math to where it's, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, if you're learning the program, it seems like you either got it or you don't got it, or are you graded on like your English or your grammar, like, or is it? Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. Well, I can speak to that. I mean, first of all, there are several components to the
Okay.
training. So
okay,
there are academic classes.
okay,
Okay, and in those, at least the programs I know of, you get grades,
okay,
and you have to maintain a GPA, et cetera. And then there's also practicum work where you are,
Okay.
a student therapist, and
yeah,
you have people overseeing your work, and you don't get grades there.
okay,
You would either be deemed to be doing adequately well or not.
okay,
And then there is the research component. So when you
Okay.
are writing a dissertation, you don't get graded on that. I mean,
Right.
you're either passed or not.
okay,
And then there is also, in addition to the practicum work that you do at your academic institution,
mm-hmm.
then you would also do an internship somewhere else.
okay,
And again, you don't get a grade there. You either completed your internship satisfactorily or not.
okay. This far in, is there still opportunities to write papers or articles?
Yeah, although it's much easier to do if you're in an academic setting
Okay,
where you have a lot of structural support for research.
right,
People outside universities and other sorts of research operations still, they write papers, but it's not
right,
the bulk of that
Okay.
materials written by people in academia.
I think it's going back to like the TV and film. I think of like when I'd asked the question earlier about law enforcement, there was another angle also I was thinking of like, have you watched Mindhunter?
I have not. No.
Okay, do you know what that-
It's been recommended to me, and it's on my list, but
Yeah.
it's a long list.
But it's like the behavioral patterns or what makes a serial killer kind
Uh-huh.
of thing. That those two police officers are going and interviewing serial killers to figure out what is the brain,
Mm-hmm.
what makes up the brain of it. But then they end up getting somebody, I think she is a professor or something, to come and help with the project. But that's why I was thinking of that too, with how big like true crime and everything is now.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess everything is so doctor-patient confidentiality. Like, and I'm sure there are some that seek that out. And Fraser Crane, that they're like, oh yeah, if you need me to be on the radio or write an article for I'm going to say Metro Pulse just to go old school on this, I can do that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that are like, nah, I can't do that without breaking a little bit of that bond between the two, my patients and I.
Yeah. Well, people certainly do write about their patients. They typically do so with, taking measures to preserve
Right.
the person's anonymity. That does happen. And
Like a study, almost like this is a study in this person.
yeah, sometimes a person might write up a single case
Yeah.
because it illustrates something, or they might talk about their work with this particular category of folks.
Yeah.
And there are ways to do it. It does happen, sure.
Like somebody, now I want to look if this is a book. I'll bet you there's a book on somebody or a case study on people who treated EMT workers post 9/11. There's got to be a lot of, I would think there's got to be a lot of work there. Like if those people were open to it, though. That's the thing I don't think about a lot. Like if you break a leg, you go to the hospital and you get it fixed.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go through something like 9/11, you may not necessarily seek treatment or help for that.
That's true.
Yeah, it's not a correlation of A plus B. It's who knows. Okay. In the kind of same vein with papers and articles, are there a lot of like conferences or workshops or anything? It kind of goes back to the betterment or the improvement, or is it?
Yeah, there's a whole industry for continuing education.
Right.
Licensure has requirements for that kind of
Okay.
thing. There are a lot of problems with the way it's set up, and I could sit here and criticize it, but then I really feel obligated to put forth a better alternative, and I don't have one. So, but I can tell you that I'm required in order to maintain my license to get
Right.
a certain number of hours of continuing education, and it can take different forms. Typically, though, it comes in the form of going to conferences and seminars and workshops. The problem with that is that I could satisfy that requirement without going to anything that would have any relevance to what I actually do.
Okay.
That's not what I do, but
Right.
that
Right.
it could be done that way.
Right.
And it's also the case that some of what I'm required to do is not necessarily
Yeah.
relevant to what I need. And I think people that are conscientious about doing this kind of work are actively seeking out learning experiences anyway. So it's like the only people that you have to legislate this sort of thing for are the people who probably are not going to do it very well anyway.
Okay.
These are the people who wouldn't be pursuing learning if they weren't made to. And therefore, when they're made to, they're unlikely to pursue the kind of learning that would actually make any difference.
Right.
So,
They're checking a box.
yeah. So, I appreciate the need for licensure to come with requirements of this sort. I don't know of any way to make it
Okay.
mean what it's supposed to mean.
Right. How often do you have to? Is the license an annual thing, or is it a like every 5 years thing, or that they review, or I guess they review, or what?
Well, there's also actually oversight is done on a kind of like a randomized basis,
Okay.
like tax audits. So it's not like somebody's looking over my shoulder
Right.
all the time.
Different ways of growing up. You say tax audits, I think drug tests.
Okay. Yeah. So, let's see. I'm sorry. You had.
How often do you have to renew your
Oh, right.
license, or is it come up for? Is it annually, or
Yeah.
it is annually?
Yeah. Although, things like the licensing requirement, the way that's set up for continuing education
Right.
is it's over a 2-year period.
Okay.
So you have to
Yeah.
have so many hours over a 2-year period.
Okay. That makes sense, because something could happen, and in 1 year you couldn't fulfill that, but the next year you could you could do more to make up for that.
Yeah.
Are you? This may not be the best. Are you on the same path, or the same discipline, or same what you're doing as when you started in '92, or have you changed that?
I've reinvented myself several times.
Okay.
So that in one sense, there are certainly things that have remained constant,
Okay.
but I have had periods where, for example, I saw almost all kids and adolescents.
Okay.
I don't anymore. Not because I've tried to get rid of them,
Right.
but I just haven't been actively seeking that particular population
Okay.
for a while, and it has kind of lulled. It may come back. I mean,
Right.
next week I may have an influx of younger patients. Some of it is not really under my control. I have at times been much more involved in evaluations as opposed to treatment.
Okay.
Whether those were, custody evaluations for the court,
Right.
or personality evaluations for other clinicians who are treating someone. They want to know, they want to get a different window into this person's dynamics. I do almost no evaluations anymore.
Okay.
I have, alongside psychotherapy, I have also, for the last 10 years or so, been doing something called neurofeedback, which is a form of biofeedback that allows people to train their brain to make different patterns of brainwaves.
Yeah.
And it turns out that certain brainwave patterns are associated with certain problems, and if you can get the brain to shift the kind of brainwaves that it's generating, it helps with those problems. And so that's a completely different angle than psychotherapy.
Okay.
I mean, it really goes along with what I was saying earlier about
Yeah.
the emergence of neurology
Yeah.
and neurophysiology in the field. That hasn't replaced my psychotherapy interest, but it is an adjunctive treatment.
Yeah, there's somebody I know that said this was just his own little theory, and he's not an expert, but he was like, I don't think anybody under the age of 25 should do any hard drugs because your brain is still developing and forming until you're like 25. So if you dropped acid or did DMT or something, it could fry something in your brain. And it was just his own little pocket theory, but it was like, he's like, nah. He was like, I think he comes from like a CTE background. So he was like, yeah, you kind of need to watch out for that. That doesn't mean he didn't do that before he was
Right.
I think that's also one of those hindsight kind of things.
Right.
This may be the oddest question yet. So when you see someone you treat in public, do you have to act like you don't know them?
Well, there's no law that says I have
Okay.
to, but that is
I
what
just think of Knoxville. Like
Yeah,
Knoxville,
that is what I
everyone
do.
knows everyone.
Yeah, and it is. I've certainly had that occur, and I try to tell people up front that, if we run into each other, I'm going to act like I don't know you,
Yeah.
just because that is the default that leaves you in charge of whether or not you
Right.
want to say hello.
Right.
I don't want to invade your life. I don't
Right.
want to put you in an awkward position of having to explain how you know me to the person that you're with, or
Yeah.
there are all sorts of ways that could be awkward, and
Yeah.
so I just act like I don't know them so that I leave them with the maximal control over the situation.
Okay. So you think we've missed? I've gone through all my questions now. So that's it. Thank you for doing this.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I was glad to have this chat.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.